This is Dr. Robert Watkins, orthopedic spine surgeon to professional athletes and creator of the Back Doctor app.
Hi everybody, good evening. This is my first kind of personal story to tell around the fireside or in front of my library bookcase, and so I'm a little nervous about it, but I'm really happy for anybody who joined me for this talk. I appreciate that, and if you have any feedback or comments, please put them at the bottom and I'll try and follow up at the end. And so I just want to give you a little bit of introduction. I basically want to talk about the homeless situation, the drugs, and the crime that are going on in my neighborhood and in Los Angeles, but mainly in my neighborhood because that's my perspective. And I want to give you some perspective that I don't think is entirely being heard about on the LA Times and the radio and the TV. And my real goal is to just tell you what I have observed and what I have learned and what I have talked about. And I don't want this to be political. I think that, the fact that everything's so divided politically, it really inhibits our ability to make rational decisions and come to a general consensus. I'm looking for some normal middle ground of just normal people who care about each other and what we can do to help out. And ultimately, I want to tell my story. I think it's an interesting story. It's been totally enlightening and eye-opening for me. And a lot of other people I've told the story to have really related to it and are going through a similar thing, either here or anywhere else, but mainly here in Los Angeles, neighbors and other friends. And so a little bit about myself. I'm Robert Watkins. I'm a doctor. I'm an orthopedic spine surgeon. I do back and neck surgery. I work in Marina del Rey. I live in Mar Vista. I grew up in LA. I grew up in South Pasadena, pretty normal town back in the 80s. And I think it's important you understand some of my perspective because that's obviously how I see things and how I'm going to interpret the situation, what's going on around me. Growing up in LA in the 80s, there's a lot of drugs around. I certainly know the whole drug scene. I can tell when people are doing drug deals and when shady business is going on. I'm not a prude, but I'm not a degenerate either, somewhere in the middle. Probably getting more and more boring every year, but such is life. And also I trained at USC. I spent 9 years in East LA at County Hospital, General Hospital, USC County. And so 9 years there, I dealt with a lot of drug addicts. Mainly it was heroin, also cocaine and crack. But, the shooter's abscesses, where people get shooter's abscesses, pussed out abscesses in every part of their body. I mean, for 9 years, one of my primary responsibilities was to treat those, slash them open. So I dealt with a lot of drug addicts. They're very manipulative. They're also people. I actually enjoyed the challenge of connecting with another person and finding the humanity, but also not getting taken advantage of. They're extremely manipulative. And so, anybody who's had that experience, you get a pretty good idea as to who's dealing drugs and doing drugs. You can spot them walking down the street. Not always. We're not 100%, but it's relevant to part of my background. And so nowadays, I'm a pretty normal guy. I'm 47. I got 2 kids, 2 boys I'm trying to keep them on the straight and narrow, but also be compassionate, have rules, but have compassion at the same time. And so it's a struggle. There's no doubt for all of us. And so what I'm going to tell you, my goal, like I said, is to give you some perspective on what I've experienced, what just showed up on my front door. I didn't ask for this. It just showed up. And what I learned. I've been to a lot of meetings. I've talked to councilmen, representatives, neighborhood council. I've protested for the first time in my life. And it's been really interesting. I've met a lot of great people. I've bonded with a lot of my neighbors over this mutually troubling time and experience. So my story is going to start with part 1. I call it The Awakening. I basically was just going about my life, and all of a sudden, I was awakened as to what was going on in my neighborhood. And it all started, I literally was taking my 2 boys and our 2 dogs for a walk at about 6 o'clock in the afternoon. It was kind of dusk out, and we walk right out in the middle of our street. And as we start to walk down the street, of course, we leave our front door wide open and the door open of our yard too. And because it's just boys, I didn't know where Michelle was, but and we start walking. And as I'm walking, I look back, or my 2 dogs, I walk them without a leash on, so they go running. They're little labradoodles. They're harmless, but they yap a lot. So they go running up the street, yapping after a couple guys. And I look at these 2 guys walking down the street. One guy's on the sidewalk. The other guy is like 10 feet behind him, walking in the street. So first of all, any guy walking in my neighborhood alone without a dog, it's kind of like, what are you doing, buddy? Like, that's a little weird to cast judgment, but you got to do that. You got to stereotype sometimes to form judgments to protect yourself and your family. You don't go crazy about it. I'm not going to go arrest this guy or do a citizen's arrest or call the cops, but I'm paying attention. That's weird. Guy walking down the street. Now he's got a friend 10 feet behind him. Well, that's weird too. What's he doing walking in the middle of the street? So my dogs go up and I whistle at them and they come to me. And I start walking, but then I just thought it was weird. And so I kind of lingered back. And I walked about a little bit, couple houses, and I turned around and started walking back because my house is wide open too. So I figured I better stay close. So I walked back, and as I'm walking back, the guy is walking in the middle of the street, crosses to the other side of the street, kind of looks in a trash can, kind of looks into the house across the street, then comes back over. And so I walk in the middle of the street so that I have to meet him, so that he has to look me in the eyes and pass by me. A physical barrier, at least. So I kind of stand there just looking at him. And my dog is there, and he says something like, you got a ferocious guard dog there, And I said, well, yeah, the neighborhood watch. And as soon as I heard this guy talk, I knew he was a drug addict. And that's obviously a jump to a conclusion, but he had sunken in eyes, yellow sclera, was unshaven, was a little bit just scuzzy, and just had that growly type of deep voice, and it was just like, I just set off my alarm, reminding me of being in a county hospital. I'm like, what is this dude doing walking down the middle of my street with his buddy 10 feet ahead of him? That's weird. And this is probably about 8 weeks ago, maybe 10. So I take my family and I'm like, okay, walk's over. Let's go back inside. And everybody gets treats and call it a day. But then I got in my car. I waited like 10 minutes. I thought, that's a little weird. So I get in my car to follow them. And I follow them. And these guys walk so slow. What's crazy is as I'm following them in my car, they're walking. I pull over like 3 or 4 times to give them space. I've watched movies. I know how to trail somebody. And so I'm letting these guys get ahead of me. But as I pull over, I literally pull up behind 2 different cars with 2 people, at least 2 or 3 people sitting in the cars, just sitting there on my street, not doing anything. And I don't think live there. And I'm kind of like, what are these guys doing? Are they just doing drugs, just scored some weed or something, and are smoking or shooting up right here on my street? But I'm kind of like, I ain't got time to deal with these guys. I'm following these. So I follow these guys down the road. Eventually they stop at the bottom of my street, and they just kind of hang out there on either side of the road, just hanging out. And I circled back around, and they're still hanging out. They kind of made eye contact with me and, just triggered my alarm, like, who are these guys and what are they doing on my residential street where there's no stores, there's no reason for them to be here. So it kind of triggered my alarm. Anyway, I posted it actually on Nextdoor. Subsequently, I've been banned from Nextdoor, but that's a whole nother story. And I posted it, and people kind of said, oh, you're just overreacting, whatever. And I got invited to a meeting, and at this meeting, there was a bunch of people from my neighborhood, but a little bit down the block, who had an incident going on, and they had a meeting. They invited me to come because I seemed like a concerned citizen, and so I go to this meeting, and it was so eye-opening. The neighbors, and I'm going to try and not use any names, and not really, this is their story too. I don't want to get anybody in trouble. I hope I don't get in trouble. And I also want to, 2 other things I want to say is I am scared for my life. I'm scared for my family and my kids. These people, the homeless people or the people on the street and the drug dealers and drug addicts are right on my street. Recognize similar faces. They know what I look like. They know what my car looks like. They know where I live, basically, if they take any effort to find out. And the other part is the political part is I'm really just not interested in getting into some political battle. So if you say anything too inflammatory, I may just delete the comment or whatever else. But let's just try and stay focused about that. So I'll try not to tell anybody else's story too much. But these neighbors, and they've been very gracious and generous, and they're living with the same problem. They are talking to the LAPD and telling the LAPD about what's going on in our neighborhood. And basically, a drug dealer was setting up a tent and a couch and a mattress in an alley that wasn't used, and would put up a bed sheet, so you couldn't even see down the alley from the top of the alley. And then at 10 o'clock at night, a van would pull up, and like 5 people would get out of the van, walk down the alley, shoot up, and pass out. And it's kind of like, whoa. And so some neighbors called the city and said, we've got this, this drug house going right in our alley. And the city said, well, it's an encampment because it's tents and a mattress. And an encampment takes on average 90 days to get rid of. And the neighbors are like, this is not an encampment. This is a flop house in public going on right in our back, right behind our houses. They were even taking needles, used needles, and throwing them over the fence into people's backyards. I heard stories from moms who had kids playing in their backyard and found used needles in the backyard. And so I'm just kind of blown away. Like, I can't believe this is going on right on my street. And the crazy part, too, was as we're talking to the LAPD, every once in a while, one of the neighbors would go, there's one of the guys right there. There's a drug dealer right there. And literally, we're at this restaurant that's half in, half out. And walking on the sidewalk right behind the cop who's talking to us is a drug dealer. And the neighbors are like, I got pictures of him selling drugs. There's one. Literally, there was like 3 to 5 drug dealers walking by as we're talking to the cops. They don't care. They're not scared. They're not abashed about it. They're not trying to hide it. They're just literally walking back and forth. And I'm just blown away. Like, literally, the cop was kind of like right there. Like, but he was like, let's stay focused. Let me get the story first. And so that really just kind of opened me up, like, what is going on in my neighborhood? And I live in a reasonable neighborhood. I mean, it's kind of like, at least it was. So that was really eye-opening. And basically, part of it is the drug dealers knew the rules, that at between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. you couldn't clear an encampment because of the Boise, Idaho. I'll get into that in one of the next sessions. But basically, they knew the rules. So if they showed up at 10, they could set everything up and it wouldn't be taken down because it was a homeless situation. But in reality, it was a crack house just going on in broad day in public at 10 o'clock at night. And so that was really eye-opening. And basically, some of the dads got together and took control and just dealt with it themselves, which they put their life in harm to take care of this, but they had to because the city was doing nothing. And it was really a cry for help. So basically then I started waking up, especially on Saturdays and Sundays. I'd wake up at like 4:30, 5 in the morning, just wide awake, like, hey, I wonder what's going on in my neighborhood. Maybe I should go check things out. So I'd get in my car and drive around, and it was crazy. I can't believe how much activity was going on my street at 4:30 in the morning. And I don't think it's always been occurring, and everybody else is just asleep, but I literally would see guys on scooters going up the street, and I would follow them, and they would like go to the gas station, get some chips, and I saw a guy getting dropped off at the top and taking an electric bike down the road. Like, what are these people doing at 4:30 in the morning on my street? Maybe they're going to work, maybe they're construction workers, but 4:30 is a little early. And I'd follow them. I followed a couple. I had a couple confrontations with some of them. I saw guys riding on my street with a bike on their arm as they're riding their bike. Like, clearly they just stole the thing at 4:30 in the morning. So I had some confrontations, and I also had a confrontation with basically a bike stealing ring at 4:45 in the morning. Guys were out there in front of an RV breaking down 5 or 6 bikes, just wailing away. Bang, 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 bang. I'm like, what is going on here? This is crazy. And, so I would confront them in different ways and say, hey, what's going on, guys? Or, hey, you got a lot of bikes there. What's the plan? Is there a party? Did I not get invited? What's happening? And it got pretty hostile. I got threatened. I had some of the drug dealers and some of the bike stealers tell me they were homeless, tell me that just because they're homeless doesn't mean they're doing drugs, tell me it was none of my business, tell me to F off, get out of their car like they were going to come kick my butt. And it was a little hairy. I'll tell you one little funny side bit. I had to switch cars with my dad because I was worried about my car. So I switched cars with my dad. My dad's the most generous man in the world to do anything. And I switched cars, and he lives in a different neighborhood. And Bobby, my older boy, said, so you switched cars, so now the drug dealers are going to chase Papa around? But anyway, momentary aside, sorry, I don't mean to make jokes. It's a serious issue, but obviously I am a storyteller and whatnot. I got to make it somewhat entertaining. I appreciate you guys being with me. But anyway, so I had some of these confrontations, and I started to realize that we got these drug dealers and drug addicts and criminals who are stealing bikes, breaking into houses, stealing everything in sight, and they're claiming to be homeless. And, this is just driving me crazy. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I go down there. So I started making patrols. Like, I would go down there once or twice a day in my car. I'd go for a jog in the morning down there. I'd go with other neighbors. We got some neighbors together and went for walks. You guys out there know who you are. Thanks for coming with me. And we'd walk down and we'd take pictures and we start to get to know the faces. And basically we realized, look, there's a bunch of 25 to 30-year-old kids down there with scabs all over the face, basically from meth, from scratching themselves, who have nice shoes, backpacks, and they're riding scooters and bikes and electric bikes, going from the RVs to the encampment to the alley to the bowling alley, Like, this is a whole drug circuit going on. And if you just stop and watch what's going on and document what's going on, you realize this is a drug deal and a drug scene going on. Subsequently, I learned that they're stealing everything less than $950 to either support their drug habit or just to make money off the whole deal. And so it was pretty alarming, and I posted a couple things maybe 8 weeks ago when I first started to realize this, because one of the hard parts was all I heard on the LA Times and on the news and everything else, especially the LA Times, was we have a housing crisis going on in California and in Los Angeles, and we need to build more houses and build shelters and have low barrier shelters where anybody can come in regardless of drugs any hour of the night, and to solve this problem. And the only reason why it's not being solved is because people aren't letting it be built in their neighborhood. Like, I'm not letting a shelter be built right at the bottom of my block, so I'm the problem. And NIMBYs, not in my backyard, was a term being thrown around that said, it's a housing problem and we're the roadblock to the housing being built, even though we contributed $1.2 billion by Double H Bond. And where in my neighborhood, I'm like, whoa, give me a break. These are 25, 30-year-old kids dealing and doing drugs and stealing everything we own. This is not a housing crisis. And so I started to speak out about it, started to do different things, get engaged, and I went to another meeting. I started to hear from other people. As I started to get involved, people reached out to me. On Nextdoor, people would text me, send me direct messages, email me, and say, thank you for saying something. Our neighborhood has gone crazy, and nobody's talking about it. And so I heard stories about women, about the 405, where Venice goes under the 405 has been a pretty big encampment for a while. And imagine the people who live right next door to that. I've listened to some of their stories of women being chased to their car, not wanting to leave for work or come home at certain hours because of what the scene would be like and they didn't have protection. Feces in their driveway, used needles everywhere, people urinating in public, people shooting up. I know 3 people who have seen people shoot up in public, including in front of 2 children. One woman stepping on a needle down by our post office, a used needle, stepping on the needle. Another woman finding a used needle while her kids walking to school. I mean, so in the past 2 months, it's just exploded. And it's all over us and we're completely saturated. And the crime I've had a neighbor completely ransacked, cars broken into, bikes stolen. I know about 3 people on every block on my street that have been broken into or have had something stolen in less than 3 months. And yes, I live in LA. And yes, there's always been crime and there's always been drugs. We've had people selling drugs in cars in front of our street, but they were discreet about it. I knew what they were doing. Get out of a car, get in the other car, drive off. They were probably selling weed. I don't know, but they were discreet. They moved on. This is in broad daylight and in the alleys of our houses. Used needles in bushes of daycare centers, which is one daycare center a block away from my house. I mean, it's out of control. Any normalcy of if you go to work, you pay rent, you pay mortgage, you expect at least safety. You expect to not have used needles and drug users and people stealing everything in sight. And that's basically all we're asking for. And so with that, my main point today is just to kind of give you an idea as to how I even got involved in this. I literally was minding my own business, trying to contribute to society, trying to be good, being a doctor, and this just fell right. And it's happened to a lot of people. And I'm not trying to ask for any unique sympathy. And I empathize with the people on the street. I empathize with the people addicted to meth. And we need to get them help. But we also need to decrease our tolerance for what is going on our streets because they're killing themselves and they're killing us. And so my next segment, I'll talk about what we've done, what I have learned, and what do I think we can do as neighbors for your neighborhood and for the greater city as to going forward. And then the third part I'll do is I'll speculate a little bit more. And unfortunately, we have to wade into some politics because that's who makes the decisions and does things. But it's also good. I'm really looking for a middle ground, and I have hope that there's a middle ground of what we can do. What are some of the policies we can do? What can we do as a community to fix this problem? Because it's totally out of control. And if you don't know, if you want some more sordid details, come over and or buy me a drink. I'll meet you somewhere. I've got pictures that document everything. And one other thing I want to mention is I have documentation of direct links from the encampment to drug dealing, drug using, bike stealing. I've got documented evidence. And so it's not everybody down in the tents down in our neighborhood or doing drugs and committing crimes. But if you go down there and walk around, at least 80% of them are. And I guarantee you. And so that's my intro. That was my awakening of how I ended up here doing Facebook Lives about this topic. And anybody who can relate to that, I hope that somewhat has been cathartic or somewhat helpful. And if you have any comments, please put them below. Next week, Tuesday, 5:30, so long as I'm out of surgery, I'll be here again, and I'm going to do part 2, which is what we have done as a neighborhood and as a community to try and do something about this. So thank you for joining me. You guys have a good night. Bye.